All right, I've got 7 o'clock. I'm going to admit them, and then I'm going to announce we'll give 1 minute grace period. Hi, Linda. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm going to give about 60 seconds of grace period here. We'll get going. Stand by. Okay, I've got 7:01. Thanks again for being here. My name is Ed Rich. I am the Director of Communications for the Maplewood-Richmond Heights School District. Thank you for making time to engage in this most important process. We're talking about the next leader of the MRH High School. This session will be recorded for the benefit of our friends who can't be here. We ask that you please use the chat function on the bottom of the screen, slightly to the left of center, for questions. I have a list of pre-submitted questions that we'll review. So you might want to hold off until after you've heard those. If a question that you have hasn't been covered in the pre-submitted questions, then jump on and submit yours as well. I want to acknowledge the presence tonight of our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Benita Jameson. We also have a couple of members of the Board of Education. We have Directors Katie Kaufman and Linda Robinson. So thank you for being here as well. I am going to hand it off now to Dr. Shonda Ambers Phillips, our Assistant Superintendent for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, but who is also the head of our Human Resources Division, which places her in the captain's chair tonight. So, Dr. Ambers Phillips, good evening.
Thank you. I'm going to give me a moment so I can share my screen. Is it projecting correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. So good evening, parents, community members, Board of Education members, and colleagues who were able to virtually chime in tonight. And for those who are not attending, welcome to this space. As Ed Rich said, my name is Dr. Shonda Ambers Phillips, and I am the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion here in Maplewood-Richmond Heights School District. I am honored to be able to present, and I have the pleasure of leading the process for the next principal of Maplewood-Richmond Heights High School. And so I will be presenting the principal search process tonight and sharing with you a little bit about the process that we will be using to facilitate this work. So first, an overview. Again, welcome virtually to this space. I want to provide the overview for the agenda and the schedule or the format for tonight, the purpose of the meeting and our desired outcomes. First, we want to provide an overview of the process. Next, we want to answer any questions the community may have. And then we hope you walk away more informed, more confident in the importance of this work for MRH and the integrity of the process. I'm going to share some content with you tonight through a slide deck, and then there will be an opportunity for Q&A. Some of the questions and answers will come from, some of the questions will come from the survey that we sent out for our students and parents. And then also some of the questions will be taken from the chat tonight. And then we'll share some next steps. First, I want to alert your attention to the board policy. And so our work is really governed by the board policy. It provides the blueprint for the work that we will do in hiring our new administrator. And that policy is GCD-1. It's the Professional Staff Recruiting and Hiring Policy. And this policy states that the board and the administration of the Maplewood-Richmond Heights School District will make every effort possible to attract and to retain qualified, highly skilled, and experienced personnel. It also states that the hiring procedures will comply with all federal and state laws that prohibit against discrimination.
Once I got in the shower, the smell of Mexican. Yeah.
I think we've got someone we probably need to mute. Thank you. And then the same policy also provides some information pertaining to the recruitment and the advertising of this position, the screening process, and then ultimately hiring our next principal. Finally, a majority of the board must vote affirmatively to employ any person or to enter into an employment contract with any individual. So I wanted you to have that background. This particular slide, I'm going to defer to Dr. Jameson for. This was one of the questions that came up in the survey that we actually administered, and I want to give her an opportunity to address the recent hires.
Thank you, Dr. Ambers Phillips. So one of the questions that was posed was regarding the hiring of Ferguson Florissant School District employees. And one of the things I wanted to outline, going back to the previous slide of the hiring process and what that actually looked like. So I've listed, as you can see in the far left-hand column, the positions that have been hired. And I do want to say I spent the first year having a listening and learning tour, and a lot of the conversation from teachers, family members, parents in our community, as well as my direct reports and their direct reports, informed the decisions as it relates to the organizational chart that was brought forward. I will tell you that a lot of these positions, while they were not hired Maplewood Richmond Heights positions, they were positions that were actually paid through consultant work. For example, some of those positions included the federal programs position, as well as some of the operational work when the director of operations position was vacant through a consulting company. So I want to first start off with the positions that have asterisks by them. Those are positions that I actually hired, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, if you can recall, was actually one position. And that position also included the federal programs position and the title position coupled together. So as you think about the role of human resources and you think about the role of a person responsible for creating curriculum and ensuring quality instruction takes place in our classrooms, that is a heavy lift for any one person to actually facilitate. And so a lot of the feedback that I received from staff is that it would be advantageous for us to pull those positions apart to ensure that the work that needed to be done in the curriculum and instruction area could be completed. The other piece is the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources. A lot of the feedback that I received from my listening and learning was really underpinned by, one, the equity policy that the board has and it has approved, as well as the resolution that goes along with it. But the other piece is, how do we begin to have conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion within our school district consistently and also having continuity? So I'll start. So the first three positions: Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, and the Director of Operations / AD position. I'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. They were screened by an external screener. And so I will be quite candid. I was very intentional when I did that and through my conversation with the board, because if you've worked anywhere and if you've worked with anyone that you viewed as being a good leader, typically people will follow what they deem to be good leadership. And so as a means to ensure that there was transparency in the process, I specifically used an external screener to screen all candidates. I did not have any participation in the interview process. I did not look at the candidates. I did not know who applied for those positions. My committee, which are my cabinet members, some of them you are aware of. We had principals sitting on the interview committee. We had student support services sitting on the committee. We also had the human resources person sitting on the committee. So the committee was charged with sending me 2 to 3 candidates. And I trust them to do that. And so from those candidates that were sent, I interviewed, if they sent 2, I interviewed 2, if they interviewed 3, and I selected the candidate that, one, mirrored the values of Maplewood Richmond Heights School District, but the other piece of that embodied the work that we needed to have done. And so if you see with the first 3 hires that I actually was responsible for, Dr. Ambrose Phillips, who's leading this process, actually was hired from Kirkwood. The assistant superintendent of CNI came from Afton, and the director of operations / AD came from St. Louis Public Schools. The federal programs, MTSS, and technology coordinator positions, I want to uplift that the multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS position, is not a MRH paid position. As I did my listening and learning in the school district, I recognized we needed additional safety nets for our kids in the area of academics as well as social emotional learning. So I did advocate through special school district for that position, and they are actually funding that position. So if you look at those 3 positions were all screened by the previous human resource department person. They established a committee, and those individuals were hired by one of my hires, Dr. Chris McGee. I did not participate in those interviews. I did not sit with those individuals. I was not a part of that. And those individuals who were part of that hiring committee, again, were members of my cabinet, which are current MRH employees. There you can see where those individuals were hired. So the federal programs person came from Merrimack Valley. The MTSS person came from Ferguson Florissant School District, and the technology coordinator position did come from Ferguson Florissant. Again, not my hires, was not a part of the process for those particular hires. You can see who those individuals were. And again, the committees did not include me. So I'm going to go down to the middle school assistant principal position. That position was actually hired before my tenure, and that was due to a transition of the middle school assistant principal for a pay increase in a neighboring district. Those positions were screened by the former human resources person and Dr. Dietrich. Dr. Dietrich hired that person. I did not participate in interviews, nor did I give a recommendation for that person. That was Dr. Dietrich's hire. He currently is still in the district, serving in the capacity of our interim director of operations. So he can definitely provide some additional context for those of you who are interested. So the elementary assistant principal position, I did not hire. That position was screened by the former human resources person. I was not a part of those interviews, and that person was hired by Dr. Angela Thompson. So that person did come from Ferguson Florissant, again, did not give a recommendation, did not participate in the process. Now, the 2 hires for the elementary school principal and the ECC I did hire. Again, the former HR person screened the ECC principal position. At that time, I had not yet started my tenure. I actually came on campus to participate in those interviews and so forth. So I did have 2 candidates that were sent to me after the committee interviewed those individuals. I interviewed the 2 candidates, and I selected the candidate who could continue the work that was occurring at ECC. And the same would be said for the elementary principal position. I want to be very clear. It is very, very difficult to lead a district such as ours and hire a person or persons who do not have the capacity to do the work. So I am less interested in hiring someone from a district by which I've worked than hiring a person who's going to embody the core values and the attributes necessary to grow our kids academically and from a social emotional standpoint. I thought it was important that we spend some time to address this because, one, now that I'm on Facebook, if you're interested in following me, I do see some of the comments that surface. So when I saw this surface again in one of the questions, I thought it was prudent for me to give an overview regarding how hires are done and who does the screening and what my participation is. And so any position that I'm interviewing for, and Dr. Ambrose Phillips will talk more about that, I usually don't see candidates until the very end of the process. So I don't know who applied. I don't know who's interviewing. I am not a part of that. So I just wanted to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to give an overview regarding recent hires and our rationale for that, and also to point out that some of the positions the district is not funding. And in addition to the listening and learning from our teachers, our families, and other individuals with whom I spoke, which outlined the positions that you see here. So thank you for that. And Dr. Ambrose Phillips, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jameson. So next we will transition to the interview timeline for this process. So on December 9th, 2022, Dr. Kevin Grauer, our current principal of Maplewood Richmond Heights High School, submitted his letter of resignation. He has been the principal for 14 years, and so this is really big shoes to fill. And so ever since he submitted his letter of resignation, our department has been really hitting the ground running, trying to prioritize this position and this work, and to engage as many people in the process as possible. So on December 12th, we met with the high school staff to review the process, the timeline, and to develop the principal profile. On the 16th of December, this was the first time that we actually advertised the high school principal position. Just recently, you might have participated in the survey. We distributed the student and family survey. On this timeline, it says January 2nd through the 6th. This was the initial timeline. I did go back and reopen the survey, and so it officially closed on the 9th. This was a request from one of our middle school principals because we did want students to complete the survey, and our rising 9th graders, so there'll be 9th graders next year, we wanted to provide opportunities for them to participate as well. And so it actually officially closed on the 9th. January 9th through the 13th, this is an opportunity to meet with family and student groups to elicit voice for the principal profile. Again, we have recommendations and feedback from the students in the survey, but these are focus groups, and to be able to have more in-depth conversations with individuals. January 17th through the 31st, this is our timeline for actually conducting interviews. And then on February 2nd, 2003, our goal is to be able to submit an individual to the Board of Education for recommendation for the principal of Maplewood Richmond Heights High School. So the process, we talked about the high school staff process, the principal profile protocol process that we used. That is a lot of P's. Ed Rich has given me grief about it. But the directions first that individuals participated in. First, individually, we asked them to think about an effective principal. What makes them effective? And then to write down 3 to 5 professional and or personal qualities or attributes that are important to them as staff members and as a learner. And so it took a couple of minutes to be able to do that first prompt. The next piece was collaboratively. We wanted them to work in groups of 5 and to share their individual lists and then just discuss any similarities or differences that they had from their list. And then collectively create a group of list of principal characteristics and attributes. And so working together to kind of drill down and come with some commonality in what they wrote. And then the third prompt was for the groups to be able to share those characteristics and attributes in the list with staff members. And so that took a couple of minutes for them to do as well. I just wanted to show you this slide deck, which actually shows some evidence of their work. I do know that one of the particular images with the Post-it notes is very small and not very legible, but I have taken all of the notes and all of the feedback and put it into a word cloud, just so you can understand and see this information in a different way. And so word clouds, if you know anything about them, you put all of the information in and the letters actually get bigger, the words get bigger based upon how many times that particular word was entered. And so it shows priority in those particular areas. And so teachers, you can see, is fairly large, students is large. Some other words that come out are autonomy, understanding, supportive, culture, district, honest, lots of different words there. For individuals who were unable to participate, I just want to note that attributes or characteristics were email, and they have also been added to the list as well. And so you can kind of see the thoughts that were represented by the Maplewood Richmond Heights High School staff there. Give you a moment to kind of take that in. Next, as a part of that exit ticket, so this was the end or the wrap up of that particular process. they were asked to identify the single most important issue for the new principal to address with staff. Again, I won't read these responses. Only 9 people participated and submitted what they thought would be the single most important issue. You see lots of different things about teacher morale, being able to have teachers to be able to have autonomy, so trusting their staff and not necessarily micromanaging, relationships, building those positive relationships with staff members, and then just creating that inclusive culture are some of the things that rose to the top for me. Next, we talked about the student and the parent and caregiver guardian survey that we pushed out from the 3rd to the 6th, which was extended to the 9th. 265 responses is what we received. And what I'm really proud of is 230 of those responses are our students themselves. So they're going to spend the most time with the principal in the building. And so I was really glad to be able to have their voice as a part of the process and amplify their voices through this particular survey. And then 35 parents actually completed the survey. So the next part really talks about those leadership qualities. We were asked to rank leadership qualities. There were 9 qualities that were listed, and they were identified, they were supposed to actually link the qualities, based upon what was most important to least important. And these were the 3 that came to the top: instructional leader, problem solver, and then effective communicator. The next that was a really close fourth was values diversity. But these were some of the qualities that they would like to see present in our leaders. And then there was a Likert scale that they answered through the survey, and 1 being very important, 5 not important. And so the responses that are highlighted represent what people found to be very important or important. And so when asked how important is it that the principal has high school administrative experience, 68.7% found that to be important or very important. High school teaching experience, 61.9%, important or very important. The principal has successful experience in the knowledge of special education, 68% prioritize this. And then the principal has experience with improving and closing the academic and behavioral disparities amongst groups of students. 71% responded here. And then finally, how important is it for the principal to develop teachers and staff? 71.3% rated this to be very important or important. Next, the survey requests individuals to provide responses on factors that they think would be the most important to the successful future of the high school. So thinking about what would be important for us as a high school at Maplewood Richmond Heights. What I did was look at all of the different responses and put them into themes based upon what seemed to bubble up. So some of the things that you see here are effective leadership, diversity and inclusion, and that sense of belongingness. It was a common theme in the survey. Increasing academic rigor was another one that really stood out. And closing gaps. A lot of responses talked about closing those gaps. So whether it's special education, whether it's our students of color, whether it's free or reduced lunch, looking at categories and making sure that we are ensuring that all students are successful. And then improving those postgraduate outcomes. A lot of feedback on making sure that students are prepared and they're either college or career ready, but they have transition points after high school and that we are preparing them accordingly. The next question is, what are the top 3 things you believe the next principal of the high school should focus on? And again, some areas that just were common themes in the responses was safety, and that was either their physical safety or their psychological safety. And so some things rose in terms of bullying or bullying or mental health and well-being. Other things such as physical safety was a common theme there. Educational equity focuses on students and also teachers, and then being an effective communicator. A relationship builder was another piece that came out, and I'm just kind of popcorning around. I give you an opportunity to actually look at the screen, but just tell you some of the feedback that was present. And then respect, and respect for yourself, respect for the students, staff, community, the environment, and the culture of MRH. And then also just talking about improving our academic and athletic opportunities collaboratively. Accountability came up as well. Accountability in terms of teacher accountability, and then the accountability for the administrator. There are some things that came up about DESE, which is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We're going through another phase of MSIP 6, which is the Missouri School Improvement Plan. And this is the 6th iteration. And so it really does have a focus on continuous improvement, and then ensuring that our students have outcomes out after they graduate from high school, and then just really creating and promoting practices within our schools that create healthy school systems. And so the accountability was a common theme as well. The next slide really talks about the most important theme. And again, this was something that we also saw in the staff process as well. So what is the most important thing that you think the candidate for the high school position should know about the MRH community? I really enjoyed reading these particular comments. And I think it was because the love that exuded in the comments. People absolutely love going to school here. They love living here. They love working here. And so the radical love that you have in MRH, the fun, the close-knit community, there was a phase of comments, a stream of comments that really spoke about diversity, and diversity being a gift, something that we value in our community. And that diversity shows up in our socioeconomic status, our race, LGBTQIA, religion, diversity in terms of ability and thought, and making sure that we're amplifying all of those voices, and we're honoring people as they come to us as their authentic selves. And so diversity was a really common theme. The other thing that came up was just how parents really want us to make sure that we are setting their kids up for success after high school, so they can reach their full potential, that they want the best hope for the future. Just an emphasis on MRH being a small town, and the strengths and challenges that come along with that, and then understanding that small is not synonymous with less. And so that we still want these amazing outcomes for our kids. And even though we're a smaller system, we want really big opportunities when it comes to our learners. Now we're transitioning to the recruitment and the advertising process. Again, the MRH website shows this position. It posted internally first, and then afterwards it posted on external sites. And so you can go on our website and see this position. We use Unified Talent as our applicant tracking system. And so I wanted to make sure I provided different snapshots for you to see these images. I want to give a huge shout out to our communication team. In the left-hand corner, we are hiring. This was the graphic they made for us for Twitter and Instagram, and it's interactive. And for the most part, if we have additional needs, they're always willing to be able to accommodate us and to provide graphics and information to kind of help us push this out in varied markets. And so thanks to Ed and Lizzie on that. But you'll see that this is the application process where people will go into the portal to be able to apply. Additional efforts to recruit, we use MoReap and Indeed and EDU openings. This provides opportunities for individuals to apply from throughout the state, but also national reach as well. So those are the postings that you can see and go to there for the position. Now let's kind of discuss the interview process. The process itself has 6 rounds or phases. So the first, Dr. Jameson spoke about, we are utilizing an external consultant to pre-screen the applications and to review the files to determine candidates to receive the performance event. And so we have a set of criteria for a candidate profile, which is actually designed based upon the feedback from the students, the parents, the staff members, also looking at the job description itself, the education, the experience of the individual, to be able to determine whether those individuals through this pre-screening process that highlights our priorities would move on to the second round or the next round to receive the performance event. Round 2, the performance events are reviewed and scored to determine candidates for screening. And this process is done by our central office administration. Round 3, the screening interviews occur and they happen via Zoom. So our hope is to have no more than 15 candidates with 20-minute screeners. And so they'll have Zoom sessions with our central office staff, no more than 15, again, 20 minutes. And then round 4 is where the teachers, the parent, guardian, caregiver, and the central office team interviews individuals. So you'll see now that the pool is actually narrowing. So we're going to bring the top 5 to 7 candidates. This is more formal in terms of the process and to be able to be interviewed. Round 5, the central office administrative principal interviews happen and we're narrowing the field even more. So now we're down to 2 to 3 candidates. After that 5th round, the team can decide to send all 3 candidates to the superintendent, or we might send 2 of the 3 candidates to the superintendent for that final 6th round of interviews. Want to share a little bit more feedback about the process. We have adopted standard operating procedures, and so all interviews, the panelists must review the confidentiality statement. Now, this confidentiality statement is really important during the search process because the individuals who participate in interviews are privy to a lot of sensitive information. They have the application, they have the demographics, they have the certifications, they know where these individuals are potentially transitioning from. And so we want to make sure as a part of the process, given the fact that people might hold jobs in neighboring school districts, that there's confidentiality in this process and they feel comfortable and competent in terms of being able to apply for this position without jeopardizing the position that they are in. And so we want to make sure that anything that's happening and concerning the interview process stays confidential. And that also is related to any conversations or discussions that we might have. It's prohibited from them being able to share that information out. So this confidentiality statement just kind of provides an overview for individuals who would be participants. And then they also have access to the reducing the personal bias when hiring article. We want to make sure that as much as possible, we embed equity in the interview process. This article is an article that they will read to be able to kind of check their own bias. We all have some bias. The first thing is to be aware of it. That kind of gets us halfway there, but then actively work to eradicate some of those behaviors that we might have from our process. And then next, we will move on and transition to the Maplewood-Richmond Heights Staff and Family Interview Interest Survey. This survey was actually solicited and pushed out to individuals, parents and guardians, and staff members who would want to be a part of the process in our search rounds. And we do have individuals who have submitted their names for consideration. I will be honest and very transparent in an effort to make sure that the interview panel actually is reflective of the students and families that we serve. We're intentionally looking at who's missing from the table, whose voices are already present and who might we need to engage to ensure that we have equity in the process in terms of the interview panel. So we've done a deeper dive to try to intentionally target specific groups to make sure that there's representation in this process. In addition, we have worked with the high school administration. So thank you, Dr. Grauer. Thank you, Dr. Dietrichs, to obtain a list of representative groups, be it parents and guardians, students and staff, who should be considered to sit on the principal search interview rounds. And so we're currently working to develop that list for the individuals who will participate. Finally, please note that the position is currently scheduled to remain open until a candidate is identified. So I went through that timeline. February 2nd comes. If we don't have a suitable candidate to be able to present to the Board of Education, we'll start this process over again. It's really important that we get this right. And so we're committing our efforts and our time to be able to do so. Having said that, if you know anyone who might be interested in applying for this position, this is our QR code. I ask that you scan that, share this with them. They can also go on our website and find the application materials there. Again, it's a great place to work, and we hope that they will be a part of our story here in Maplewood Richmond Heights, and this will take you to the process to be able to do so. Finally, as we transition to the Q&A session, I do want to provide my email address. I know that we have about an hour in the town hall process, and we may or may not get to all of the questions that are outlined either through the chat or through the survey. And so this is my contact information. If you have any questions after today, or questions maybe you don't necessarily want to put in the space virtually, feel free to give me to send an email about the process. And if I can answer those questions for you, I certainly will do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ambers Phillips. Appreciate that. So let's do it this way. As mentioned, we had some pre-submitted questions via the survey process. So I'll run through those. I think there's 4, maybe 5 questions here. And then if there's something that has not been answered to your satisfaction, then use the chat function. You can also use the reaction tab on the bottom of your screen and raise your hand, and we'll acknowledge you. And we have no issues if you want to unmute and ask a question that way. So let's get into this. One of the questions was, how would we, the administration, pitch MRH to a prospective candidate for this role? What characteristics distinguish our district and the high school, and what opportunities should be prioritized by the new principal?
I think for me, the survey, the information that I shared in the survey is where I would find that response. I think that you have a lot of vantage points from students, from families, from parents about what they prioritize. One of the things that I read in terms of looking at the survey results is that there's no one person who has the same answer. And so a priority for one person is not necessarily a priority for the next person. So engaging all voices and stakeholders. In terms of the community itself, I would encourage them to come visit Maplewood, Richmond Heights, Maplewood and Richmond Heights area, and the school district. Come to our events, whether it's our plays and our theater or our sporting events. Be in the community to really talk to students and parents. Go on our website. The About Us section tells you different information about Maplewood, Richmond Heights. We are interviewing them, but I also want them to interview us to see if this is a place that they feel like it's aligned with their philosophy, their personal beliefs, and what is important to them in a workplace environment. Again, I think it's an amazing community, but I want them to also to be able to experience that for themselves, and then to take an opportunity to really engage with different stakeholders and get their perspective. And that's where I think you develop your priorities.
I'd probably add to that, one of the responsibilities that I enjoy most is spending time in our buildings and in our classrooms. And today I had the pleasure of sitting with 2 of my board members, Katie Kaufman and Amber Withacombe, to see our public speaking students in Rich McCullum's class pitch their better MRH pitches for a variety of things. And it was exciting to see that a lot of the pitches are things that we're currently working on. And those are things that I would want to hear. I always say out the mouths of babes. And so they tell us what they want and what they're interested in and what they think will be beneficial for their school community. We are here to serve them, and we are here to support teachers who serve them. So that would be something I would be interested in.
Thank you. The next question, how much weight will faculty, staff, and students have in choosing the next principal? And I know we've already addressed the student part, but how about faculty and staff?
I think they should have a tremendous amount of weight. And that's one of the reasons why I'm trying as much as I possibly can. And I know Dr. Jamison has, and with the help of Dr. Grauer and Dr. Dietrichs, to be able to amplify their voices however we can. And so students, I think there's often this phrase, no conversations about us without us. And so I think we have to make sure that the students and the faculty are the ones who are going to most work closely with the principal. And so we need to make sure that we're engaging them in this process. And so I've had some teachers reach out to me personally to say, I'd like to be able to participate in some way. So encouraging all those conversations and getting different perspectives. There are a lot of people outside of the individuals that Dr. Grauer submitted who want to participate in the process in terms of the panel. And so we have to keep the panel small so we're not going to be able to extend an opportunity for everyone to participate, but as much as possible, allowing those individuals to have some sort of participation in some way, even if it's not sitting on the panel. I want to make sure that we're able to glean their voice, whether a survey, whether a focus group, whether it's, these intimate conversations that happen, even if it's outside of the actual interview panel. Dr. Jameson, do you have any thoughts?
I do. I think most importantly, it's to inform. And so part of the process and what I typically get at the end, because I don't get to engage with the candidates prior to the end interview, I get all of the notes. Those are usually synthesized and it outlines the strengths and opportunities. And that information is actually used again to inform and provide additional context for me, and then also helps me to ask questions where staff members may say, well, I'm not quite sure if this person is able to build relationships. And so that helps me to think about what part of this conversation do I need to insert something that will demonstrate that they're able to do that. And that's actually a piece that came out loud and clear when I was meeting with staff about relationships and also being visible and supporting students and staff with a shared level of responsibility and accountability. So for me, their role is to inform, to ensure that I have the most accurate information when I'm making the decision once my team sends those candidates to me.
Thank you. Next question. How much successful experience as a high school principal are we requiring for this position? And how are we defining or how are we rating that success?
Can I answer that one first, Dr. Ambrose Phillips?
Yes.
So I will tell you, I met an interesting, I always have a story. So I presented yesterday at the Maplewood City Council meeting. I'll be doing the same at the Richmond Heights meeting just to give an update on the district. And I met a board member in a neighboring district, and I was talking to that individual around the turnover that districts are experiencing. And this particular district has an elementary opening, and also potentially could have a high school opening. And we were talking about what does experience look like. And he said, with very few people entering education, we're looking for someone who can be molded. So while I think that's important, I also think that the breadth and level of experience that a person needs to bring to MRH. And so I respect their definition, but I also know where we're trying to go and the students we serve, and they are precious cargo. And so as I think about that individual, can they come in and actually support teachers? Because we have amazing teachers in our classroom who are already doing the work, but maybe they want to be stretched and extended, but also being able to come in and be a learner and help us move to the next iteration, specifically as we go through the strategic planning process. So there is no, when you say experience, I like to say based on whose definition, you do want the person to have some experience at the secondary level. So you may find that an assistant principal may apply for a position. And so there are other key attributes that you're looking for. Dr. Ambrose Phillips did highlight that they have to engage in a performance event. And I will tell you that MRH's process for some of these positions are actually quite rigorous, particularly when you think about the principalship. They have to observe a classroom teacher via video and talk about how they would coach that person. They have to talk about what their key priorities are for the school based on what they've learned from their own research, like Dr. Ambrose Phillips just stated, as well as tell us how they would measure that to tell whether or not they're successful. And then the last piece of the puzzle is really getting an understanding of their ability to lead professional development, and then also identify supports for our most at-promise advanced learners. So that's students who may struggle from a social emotional standpoint, students who may need support from an academic standpoint. They would actually have to be able to talk about how they plan to support those students, not what they will do, but how they will work through and with teachers to do that. So for me, experience, yes, matters, but really I'm looking for multiple levels of evidence that will show that not only they're a good fit from a core value standpoint, but they align to the vision that I have for our district. So those are the things that I think would be critical when we talk about experience.
All right, thank you. You made a brief reference there to administrative turnover, which takes us to the final pre-submitted question, which means this would be a great time to start thinking about what you want to put into the chat. But the question is, why has there been so much turnover in administration in our district over the last few years? Is it a compensation issue? Is it a support issue? What's going on there?
That is a great question. Let's start with the pandemic. It has changed the way that we do education. This was actually a question that we had on the middle school town hall with Dr. Dietrich, as well as families who joined us in that conversation. The pandemic has changed whether or not people want to work in education, and then also to look externally for places outside of education. And that's not just in MRH, but that's also in surrounding districts. The other piece of that is compensation. So we do have a compensation benefit task force. We meet once a month. And for the last 2 years, this will be my second year engaging in that conversation, the staff are highly interested, not just in salaries, which is a huge piece. And you heard me allude to staff members going next door and they're getting $15,000. And I do sometimes ask, like, you know, what will it take? And we had an administrator, I think when I first started, I had not yet started. And I had asked him and he was like, well, can you match my salary? And I was like, well, what is it? And when he told me, I was like, oh, we're not there yet. So we are engaging in a salary deep dive to really look at what the trends are. We're looking at the salaries in surrounding districts. I would say that's part of that. But there are other pieces that are part of the salary benefits, whether it's tuition reimbursement, the number of vacation and sick days. When you talk about maternity leave and then also paternity leave and things like that. So those are also other elements. And then even the school calendar. So the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education requires us to work a certain amount of days. And so, you know, there are things that people value more now since the pandemic that maybe necessarily weren't things that were important. The other piece of that, I would say, being a second year superintendent in the state, 50% of the new superintendents have only been superintendents there in their first or second year. And so there's been turnover there as well. So I think it's something that we are seeing. The state is actually focusing in on the retention of staff, whether it's teacher, even support staff. I don't want to forget to mention them. That was one of the pitches from one of our learners today during the public speaking class, like how do we take care of them? So this is a huge conversation, and we are trying to determine how we're able to increase salaries in a very fiscally responsible way over the next 3 to 5 years. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking.
If we don't get any questions in the chat, I'm going to take that as meaning that our administrators did a bang up thorough job here this evening.
You know, school teachers like wait time.
I know, I was thinking appropriate wait time. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I could unmute everybody and listen for typing fingers, but I won't do that.
The only other thing that I would add to that question about transition is, even though it's my first year, I'm learning a lot with the exit interviews that I'm doing. So people have an opportunity to complete exit interviews, both in writing, and a lot of them are following up with me with in-person interviews because I have an opportunity to ask follow-up questions and the transitions of where people are going, especially if they stay in education. We certainly have not only been looking at where individuals are transitioning to, but what the starting salaries are, the salaries that they are receiving in those areas. And so there certainly is this compensation gap that we definitely have to address in terms of the staff that we are losing. And we also want to next year do some stay interviews with individuals to determine what factors are contributing to those individuals staying and how we can increase those efforts as well. So again, as Dr. Jameson said, turnover is something that is not unique to MRH. It's something that I think we're experiencing in our support staff area. We're experiencing in our certified teachers and certainly administration. And I think it's because multiple factors, as she clearly articulated, but there's also just this piece of we're competing for the same individuals. There are a lot of individuals who left the field of education, so there was this mass exodus, and the individuals who are still here, we are competing for the same people. And so thank you to CBTF, shout out to them for doing the work on the salary analysis, and hopefully that will help us to be able to retain some staff members who are leaving for that purpose.
Okay, great. I think we've given sufficient time. Thanks right back to you too, Becky and Stacy and Joshua, for being here. Engagement is what it's all about. We don't toss the word community around lightly. All right. Unless anybody else has anything else, we'll wrap it up here.
Have a good evening.
Have a good night.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.